This is Living Catholic with Father Don Wolf. Living Catholic is a fresh look at issues confronting each of us today. This show deals with living Catholic, what that means for Catholics, as well as the impact on the rest of society. You certainly don't have to be Catholic to enjoy this show. And now your host, Father Don Wolf.
Welcome, Oklahoma, to Living Catholic. I'm Father Don Wolf, pastor of Sacred Heart Parish and rector of the Shrine of Blessed Stanley Rother. Last week, I talked about our aversion to talking about eternity. As odd as it may seem, we in our society, and this includes the church, seem to have a hard time mentioning eternity. I delved into some of the reasons, but there are still a few more things to say about the matter. In fact, it's not just eternity we don't talk about. It's heaven that's missing from our conversation. While this may be an odd lacuna in the sum of our teaching regarding the faith, it is a real one. Heaven is a part of the truth of belief. Leaving it out is to leave aside a great deal of the truth of life. We owe it to ourselves to think more deeply about this final subject. Partly, this is a result of some of the criticism the Church has received over the years. And while we may think of the Pope and the Vatican as an immutable fortress against the forces of the world, clearly they're not. And that's not a bad thing, obviously. For hundreds of years, for example, the Vatican was dead set against charging interest on a loan, and it was all in for the divine right of kings. In both of these cases, examining the exact changes in understanding and listening to the criticism of these positions, the Church changed its thinking. Taking account of criticism is necessary in every age. And there has been a good bit of criticism about the Church's focus on heaven. The complaint was that if we focus everything on what will happen in the world to come, then we take our eyes off of what will happen in this world. Not only that, we become indifferent to the injustices and outrages of our time. The proposed solution was to talk more about this world and its promises and leave the talk about the afterlife to the corners of the catechism. And this has been done in a big way. As of now, we very seldom talk of heaven. In fact, we're much more interested in talking about abstract notions of justice and right than we are preoccupied about the ultimate disposition of our souls. And I can say this with some authority because I'm just that way. I would very much like to challenge people to live rightly and to think of the just distribution of the goods of the world than to think of what lies beyond the unknowable horizon after death. But fair is fair. The life after death awaits, and we do ourselves no favor ignoring it, even if it's unfashionable to speak of it. Not only that, if we look around at some of the products of our preoccupation with justice and right, we have to admit our conversations have not always been productive. Here are 3 examples. I could give you 30. In place of frilly talk about the beauties of heaven, which no one's really interested in, we have frightful policies about the justice of cutting off organs to transform a person from one sex into another sex. This does not seem to be progress in making the world a more realistic place for human thriving. We now have achieved a society in which to propose that any person who does not have an inherent right to kill an innocent life in her mother's womb up to the moment of delivery for any reason and for no reason is regarded as an expression of unmitigated hate not to have that right. In related matters, it's thought to be completely unacceptable to wonder out loud if it's ultimately good for society to conceive children in a laboratory, hire wombs to carry them, and then have people buy them based on their eye color, skin tone, and potential IQ. Negative thoughts about such things are not permitted in polite conversation. And 100 other examples. Taking our eyes off heaven in favor of focusing on an earth made more like paradise has hardly produced the New Jerusalem. In many cases, it has produced the old Gomorrah. It's not unfair to wonder if we need to think more about eternity than we have lately. So, let's think on heaven. The first thing to note is that we believe we are born transcendent creatures. That is to say, we are immortal souls from the moment we are conceived, built to last forever. Odd to think of ourselves that way, isn't it? From that day in which we were formed as a one-celled creature destined to be implanted into the uterine wall of our mother's womb, and then until forever we are made. C.S. Lewis reminded his readers that they remember the truth of themselves as they putter about their neighborhood living their lives. The mailman who slips the letters into the slots on our doors is a creature destined to live forever in the sight of God. Standing in line at the grocery store, the young woman ringing up the items at the cash register will exist long after the galaxies are spread out across the universe by the steady expanding power of the Big Bang until all energy and matter is smeared into a thin paste. While we are impatient with the mechanic who seems hapless in the face of our car's problems, he will someday judge angels, according to St. Paul. To live past the boundary of the sum of our years on earth is the heritage we have received as human beings. God created us for forever. This is a fantastic thought. While we invest our lives in the 80 years that we can expect, or the 80 for those who are strong, the truth of the scope of our lives is open-ended. We begin amid the crisscross of time and energy as it moves among the vibrating molecules and cellular activities of our world, but we carry on throughout all time. In short, we are pointed toward forever. This is the measure of our being, the infinitude of time. Our occupation of the universe will be without end and will in fact outlast the universe in its current form and in any possible configuration. Our destiny is endless and our being is timeless. We don't normally spend much of our day thinking in those terms. We nod a bit toward the life after death, but after that, we don't ruminate much on it. Of course, no one can even imagine what sort of reality this is or might be. It's hard to think of ourselves as growing old, much less as being eternal. So we, in fact, don't think about it much at all. But if we did, we'd realize that such a future begins to transform our position in life. Immortal, eternal, without end, those are terms we can say, but they hardly even begin to inform us. They sound too abstract to be realizable by anyone, much less ourselves. And since whatever they signify disappears into the hazy distance as we imagine them, we mostly don't look at them. And admittedly, this endlessness is hard to imagine. Since we don't really know much about it, we can hardly even begin to describe it. So let's look at the other side of the equation. If we are immortal in our existence and we will live into the forever of God, this has some meaning for us in the here and now. Bonnie Tyler could sing that forever is going to start tonight, and she was right. And it does start with a total eclipse of the heart. That is to say, if forever is in the mix for all of us, none of us can ignore the truth of our situation. If we're built for the forever of our future, then it should matter in the here and now, right now. It should matter because the here and now is all we have when it comes to being ready for the continuation of our being here and now into the forever of our future. These few years we have may pale into insignificance as the centuries roll by endlessly, but they are what we have now and how we live now. We should probably take into account the preparation for what's ahead of us, and weave it into the decision-making apparatus of our lives. Just as no decent parent thinks of their toddler as forever crawling across the floor and picking up the dog's chew toy as the forever future of their darling child, so we can never imagine our lives only as the product of the struggle and uncertainty we know of today. Eventually, we will pass through these moments, and our lives will amount to something more, or will at least be leveraged into the more the rest of time provides. Getting ready for the truth of our lives should be our first priority. Since we are cast into eternity, our priority is to prepare ourselves for it. While this sounds daunting, it is logical and necessary. Stumbling into the pathways of eternity seems to be no way to leverage the endlessness of our lives toward any kind of happiness. Think about it. If this is the inevitable outcome of our living, not preparing for it would be foolish, would be the very definition of being short-sighted. Not being prepared to cross the threshold into the rest of our existence would overweight these few years we have as we're breathing and shortchange us for the rest of our time. That makes the question of preparation of the sum of the years we have to be the most important one there is. Remember, this is not, first of all, a question of damnation or salvation. It's a matter of embracing the life we are given. Christians are not the first people to believe in an afterlife, after all. This was common even among the Greeks, and it certainly has its parallels in many of the natural religions of mankind. In many of the Native American beliefs, for example, the existence of the spirit world was regarded as ubiquitous and endless. All of existence was spiritual, whose manifestations were everywhere and for always. Even rocks and animals, as well as the various influence on human thought, were part of the spirit world that suffused the universe in their point of view. Stars and planets, trees and ferns, buffalo and rattlesnakes, as well as human beings, all belonged to the world of the spirit and had their eternal place in it. Eternity isn't just a Christian formulation, but the Christian contribution to this belief is that the human soul is a sort of different being than the spirit or soul of the rest of existence. Being human is a superior manner of existing than the other manifestations of being, and so pertains to a different level of existence in the world of being. As Christians, we embrace the revelation of our lives as defined by and oriented toward eternity. This is what we are. And because it is so, then it's what we're living for. Everything we do and think, all of the decisions before us, and the sum of our acting behind us are directed toward the reality of eternity. So the premier truth of our lives is not whether we can merit heaven or escape hell, is to live as we are made, directed toward the truth of our lives. This was the insight of St. Augustine. When Adam and Eve were in the garden, they lived as creatures unacquainted with and unafraid of dying. There was no horizon for them. All they did and thought was focused on all eternity before them. There was no later and no some other time. All they experienced was filled with the glowing promise of forever, which made every decision a moment of incredible power and ultimate import in every way. There was no dispensable notions or actions that had no meaning. Every part of life was leveraged toward accompanying God forever. Adam and Eve in the garden didn't regard God's setting limits as some kind of temporary setback, and they didn't think of their lives as a test. All was participating in the wholeness of life in every aspect. They didn't have to qualify for something more or get to another stage in life in order to achieve some fuller sense of themselves. While they didn't have every experience imprinted into their lives and every sensation already programmed into their existence, they were unaware of having to merit the next part of life. It was already there for them in the fullness of life they had. This is what paradise was for them, the presence of eternity in their awareness at each moment. When thinking about this, imagine following a child learning his native language. Every child, everywhere, goes about learning how to speak and to understand the words and meanings of her house and on the street where she lives, and she does it without anxiety or difficulty. No matter how intricate the structure and how complicated the sounds of her language, every child will learn the language of her home without struggle. In fact, the child will learn it by playing. She'll even learn two completely different languages if they're in the house or on the street where she lives. We all know she doesn't go into the nursery worrying whether she'll be able to pass a vocabulary quiz or understand the past subjunctive conditional verb construction. She just lives her life. And this most complicated achievement in the universe, to speak thoughts that have never been spoken before, comes to her naturally and completely. That's what all of Adam and Eve's life was like. They lived all of their life in the same way a child lives the language she learns. It's paradise. We know by revelation that the basis of all creation is self-giving, self-forgetting love. All the world is suffused with trust, promise, charity, and care. According to John's gospel, all that was created was made by way of God's word, which was his Son, Jesus. Every part and every moment of creation reflects his presence and his reality. To be aware of life in paradise is to be aware of these attributes. The native language of eternity is to speak these attributes in everything. But when Adam and Eve acted to break the bonds holding these elements together, they lost the capacity to receive them effortlessly and easily. Human life became strangers to complete trust and self-forgetting love. Brokenness defined the world in every way. The entire book of Genesis, after chapter 3, the description of Adam and Eve and the forbidden fruit, describes how messed up the world became in every way. Not to live as Adam and Eve lived in paradise is the brokenness we have inherited from our broken world. Our cast toward eternity didn't change. We're immortal. But our awareness of and our capacity to live amid this reality was interrupted. This was the original sin. You might say our innate capacity to learn and then speak the language of life was broken. Once it was broken, we now limp along, doing our best to live according to what does not come naturally or easily. Compare those adults who have to struggle to learn and speak another language. It's hard work. It can only happen with great struggle and real discipline. What comes naturally and easily to a baby and then a child, and is mastered by the dullest and the silliest youth, can only happen with the greatest possible toil by an adult once this capacity has gone. And even then, no matter how much talent and intelligence a person has, and no matter how much time and energy he puts into it, he'll always speak with an accent, and it will always be marked as someone who's not speaking his native language. This is how our lives become. It's the definition of being lost. We try and we try, but the ease of the world is broken, and our openness and ease into infinity passes us by. Eternity exists, and we are part of it, and we can bring ourselves to it with all of our energy. But when the world was broken, we lost the capacity to speak the eternal as a native language. Without help, without translation and lessons, we never learn it on our own. The worst would be not learning to speak it at all, and so be cast into eternity, mute. The best would be the arduous work of learning it on our own and encountering it with an awful accent and provisional understanding. The metaphor of learning a language is a way to describe what we're talking about as damnation and salvation. We should understand it's not describing punishment and reward. That's where we often lose ourselves as we're trying to explain the truth about heaven and hell in the gift of Jesus. We can never get away from the cruelty of God, who sounds like he'll punish everyone for not having the chance to learn the right things or to read the right scriptures. Or we'll end up talking as if what Christians offer is the best reward for the chance to be good, which seems pretty out of touch to the sophisticated and worldly of our day. Heaven and hell aren't punishment and reward. They're the outcomes of our brokenness. Learning heaven is when we encounter the original expression of selfless love and sacrificial giving. And this happens in Christ on the cross. Encounter this truth, and you encounter how the world was made. Live this truth, and your life becomes congruent with how you were created and how the whole of eternity is structured. To believe in Jesus and to receive the gift of love and promise he offers is not to receive a reward for being astute or being lucky. It's the gateway into living the long truth of eternity as it stretches out before us. It's something like jumping into a river and following the stream in the direction it flows. If you understand that you're headed toward the river's flow, all you have to do is be on the river, and it will take you where you want to go. It's simply natural. You're not being rewarded for being a great physicist or a clever traveler. You're just going where the water takes you. That's what it's like to go to heaven. But if we don't encounter the truth of creation, if we never pass the gateway into the reality of how the world was made, we don't lose the gift of eternity. We find that our life and the eternity in it don't match. We're not carried toward the beautiful endlessness of being, but find it instead uncomfortable and wearying. If we're not standing on the foundation of creation, everything sounds funny and feels odd. If the certainty of love and the gift of acceptance are not in us, then eternity will be all struggle and failure. It would be like preparing to plant wheat seeds in salt. No matter how we work and prepare, no matter what care we take or irrigation we build, no matter which variety of wheat we find or what machinery we use, wheat will not grow in salt. Our crop will never happen because it can never happen. It's against the nature of wheat to grow that way. That's what hell is like. It's not punishment because we've been bad or have transgressed when we should have obeyed. It's simply the natural result of sowing wheat in salt. As I've written before, the great horror of hell is not that it is a surprise or something hidden, sprung on an unexpected soul at the ultimate last moment by a cruel and harsh God. No, the horror of hell is that a person would close his eyes on this world and open them on the next, seeing all of the glory of eternity and the fullness of God's love and unconditional forgiving acceptance, and looking around at what he expected and what he wanted, and then says, I'd rather be somewhere else. If we have not encountered the selfless love at the basis of creation, all revealed in the person of Jesus, then we will not ever find that we can speak the language of life. The endlessness of being would be frustration and limitation rather than joy and beatitude. Of course, since we don't learn the language of life as a child learns the language of his home, we have to work at it. Most of us have to learn the commandments and apply ourselves to doing them as odious and tedious for most of us as memorizing conjugations and remembering how to modify the nouns we've learned. It's not easy and it's not natural. Eventually, as we practice, it becomes easier. In fact, it might become even second nature. The great saints actually learned to speak the language of life with hardly an accent at all. Encountering Christ is to find the nature of life. Once we do that, once our lives become congruent with His, then we begin to know what it means to live. In fact, the gift of life extends all the way into the endlessness of continuing eternity. There is one thing we can focus on. This aspect of eternity was made famous by the philosopher Pascal more than 300 years ago. He noted that the years we have during this part of our lives is the lever by which all of the rest of infinity turns. While these few decades are over in a moment, they are the place where we find the gateway into a well-lived eternity. Why not pay attention to what we've been given? Why not focus on the choice of making our eternal voyage toward happiness? And he added, what do we have to lose? Eternity can make you think such things. The great promise is that when we do close our eyes on this world, to open them on the fullness of time as it stretches out forever, we'll look around and see that we're ready for this. The compassion of Christ in His sacrifice for us all, the forgiveness and forbearance of God's love, the depth of charity in the faces of those whom we have striven to serve, they'll all be familiar to us. It will look like home. That's what eternity will be when we're ready. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to our final segment, Faith in Verse. We have a poem today called It's Easy. It's easy to do what we do when our conscience is clear, our thoughts and desires are congruent, our soul is rightly steered. We need not worry if our imaginations have moved or veered, if we remain attentive and the fire of life has not our hearts seared. Easier said than done, of course, in the interstices of our lives. We have to navigate the sharpened edges of the dangerous knives of our temptation to shave the truth and with others connive at blunting the power of our passion and poisoning our drives. For such as this happens when we are inattentive and fall asleep, and the power of our intellect wanders beyond our capacity to keep steady to the path, ready on the mark, given to the pure and deep, as we prepare our lives for the final harvest and begin to cut and reap. We must, without doubt, keep our eyes affixed to the North Star, able to find our journey, measure our progress, and know how far we have gone and have yet to go, whether our plans are then marred by energies unknown as our base, is rattled and jarred. Turn your face to the source of all promise. Turn to the light. There, trust that whatever will follow will conquer the night. Trusting in mounting goodness, the origin of goodness and right, and all will glow with heaven's gleam, shiny, lovely, and bright. That's It's Easy. I hope you join us in the weeks to come here at Living Catholic.
Living Catholic is a production of Oklahoma Catholic Radio. To learn more, visit okcr.org.